Imagine climbing a mountain where every 1,000 feet you ascend, someone steals 3% of your lungs. By the time you reach 30,000 feet, you're breathing through a coffee stora. Your muscles fail, your vision tunnels, you die. In the 1930s, this was the reality for aircraft engines. We had built machines that could theoretically fly to 40,000 feet, but their engines choked and died above 15,000. We were building birds with clipped wings until one engineer decided to force-feed the sky into an engine's throat. To understand why Sanford Moss is an engineering prophet, we must first understand the tyranny of thin air. At sea level, air is thick, dense. An engine gulps it down and produces full power. But for every 1,000 feet you climb, the air thins by roughly 3%. At 20,000 feet, there's only half the oxygen. At 40,000 feet, there's barely a quarter. Here's the nightmare. An engine rated at 1,000 horsepower at sea level produces only 250 horsepower at 40,000 feet. The same engine, the same fuel, but the sky is starving it to death. Think of it like trying to sprint while breathing through a pinched straw. Your legs work fine, your heart is pumping, but you can't get enough air. You collapse. Throughout the 1920s, aircraft designers faced an impossible choice. Build light, underpowered planes that could climb high but carried nothing useful, or build heavy, powerful planes that couldn't get above 15,000 feet. Military commanders were furious. They knew that altitude meant survival. The plane flying highest could dive on enemies with impunity. It could bomb without being touched. But the atmosphere itself was the enemy. Enter Sanford Moss. Moss was a General Electric engineer with an obsession. He didn't want to accept the sky's limitations. He asked a dangerous question. What if we could compress thin air back into thick air? What if we could cheat altitude? The concept was insane. At 30,000 feet, you'd need to squeeze air to triple its density. You'd need a compressor spinning at impossible speeds. You'd need materials that didn't exist. And here's the real problem. Compressors need power. If you use the engine to drive the compressor, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. The engine wastes horsepower just trying to breathe. It's a death spiral. Moss found free power hiding in plain sight. He looked at the exhaust. Every engine explosion sends scorching gases screaming out the tailpipe at 1,500 degrees and tremendous velocity. This is wasted energy, pure thermodynamic murder. Moss decided to harvest it. He designed a turbine wheel. A delicate pinwheel of heat-resistant steel placed directly in the exhaust stream. The burning gases would spin this wheel to 20,000 RPM. On the same shaft at the other end sat a compressor wheel. The exhaust spun the turbine. The turbine spun the compressor. The compressor crammed thick air into the engine, free supercharging, powered by garbage. But the engineering challenges were monstrous. The turbine sat in a river of fire. 1,500-degree exhaust, continuous and unrelenting. Steel melts at 2,500 degrees, but it weakens long before that. At 1,200 degrees, most alloys turn to butter. The turbine blades would stretch. They'd creep outward from centrifugal force. They'd contact the housing and explode into shrapnel. Moss needed metals that didn't exist. He worked with metallurgists to develop nickel-chromium superalloys that could survive the inferno. Each blade was an individual masterpiece, hand-finished, inspected under magnification. A single crack meant catastrophic failure. Then came the bearings. A shaft spinning at 20,000 RPM generates forces that would tear apart a conventional bearing in seconds. The lubricating oil would flash to vapor in the heat. Moss designed cooling channels that circulated oil through labyrinthine passages, pulling heat away from the bearings, keeping them alive millisecond by millisecond. The industry thought he was insane, too heavy. An engine already has 1,000 parts that can kill you. Why add 500 more? Then came Pike's Peak. In 1918, Moss hauled a Liberty aircraft engine to the summit of Pike's Peak, 14,115 feet above sea level. The air was thin. A normal engine would barely produce half power. He bolted on his turbocharger. He opened the throttle. The engine screamed. At 14,000 feet, where the atmosphere offered only 60% of sea level oxygen, the turbocharged Liberty produced full rated power. 350 horsepower, the same as sea level. The gauges didn't lie. The compressor was cramming dense air into the cylinders. The exhaust was spinning the turbine. The system was feeding itself. Moss hadn't just built a device. He had stolen altitude from the sky. But military planners were slow. Throughout the 1920s, the turbocharger remained a curiosity, a laboratory trick. The peacetime Air Corps saw no urgency. Planes flew low, observation missions, barnstorming. Who needed to fly at 30,000 feet? Then the clouds of war began forming over Europe. By 1935, intelligence reports terrified American generals. The Germans were building high-altitude bombers. The Japanese were designing fighters that could reach 35,000 feet. If America entered the war with sea-level engines, their planes would be slaughtered from above. The Army Air Corps made an emergency decision. Every heavy bomber would be turbocharged. The B-17 Flying Fortress. The B-24 Liberator. These planes needed to cruise at 25,000 feet to survive the flak and fighters. Without Moss's invention, they would be flying coffins. But installing turbochargers on heavy bombers introduced new nightmares. The supercharger made the engines powerful, but power generates heat. At full military power, the cylinder heads glowed cherry red. The oil temperatures spiked. An engine that ran perfectly at sea level became a time bomb at altitude. And then there was the problem that killed more crews than enemy fighters, the compressor itself. When you compress air, you heat it. The laws of thermodynamics are merciless. Air entering the turbocharger at minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit exited the compressor at plus 200 degrees. This hot air was less dense. It negated some of the compression benefit. Worse, it caused pre-ignition. The fuel-air mixture exploded before the spark plug fired. The engine knocked itself to death. Engineers added intercoolers, radiators placed between the compressor and the engine that chilled the compressed air back down. But intercoolers added weight. They added plumbing. They added failure points. They added failure. A single bullet through an intercooler line could kill an engine. Bomber crews learned to nurse their turbochargers like temperamental children. They watched the manifold pressure gauges constantly. They listened for the deadly knock of detonation. They adjusted throttles and mixture controls with the delicacy of surgeons. Over Germany, the turbochargers proved their worth in blood. A B-17 cruising at 25,000 feet was above most light flak. German 88 cannons could reach them, but aiming was difficult. The formation stayed high where the air was thin, where Moss's invention kept their engines breathing. When Luftwaffe fighters climbed to intercept, they arrived gasping. Their naturally aspirated engines were wheezing. They had perhaps 60% of their rated power. The American turrets tracked them easily as they struggled through sluggish maneuvers. Meanwhile, the B-17's turbocharged engines maintained full power. The planes held formation. They kept bombing. But the Pacific Theater revealed the turbocharger's ultimate triumph and its cruelest lesson. The B-29 Superfortress was designed to bomb Japan from bases thousands of miles away. It needed to fly higher than any bomber before. 30,000 feet, sometimes 35,000. At those altitudes, even the best fighters couldn't follow. The B-29 carried 4 Wright R3350 engines, each producing 2,200 horsepower, each equipped with 2 turbochargers per engine. 8 turbochargers per plane. The complexity was staggering. During testing, the R3350 developed a horrifying tendency. It caught fire. The exhaust gases spinning the turbines were so hot they ignited oil leaks. Magnesium components in the engine burned with white-hot intensity. The crews died in training accidents before ever seeing combat. Engineers worked frantically. They redesigned baffles. They rerouted oil lines. They added fire suppression systems. But the B-29 remained a widowmaker even after entering service. The turbochargers kept the engines breathing at altitude, but the heat that made them possible also tried to burn the planes from the sky. In March 1945, General Curtis LeMay made a controversial decision. He ordered the B-29s to attack Japan at low altitude, 5,000 to 9,000 feet. The turbochargers were almost unnecessary. But the fire risk dropped dramatically. The engines ran cooler. The losses to mechanical failure plummeted. The turbocharger had given America the capability to bomb from the stratosphere. But sometimes the greatest technology is knowing when not to use it. After the war, jet engines seemed to make the turbocharger obsolete. Jets didn't need external compressors. The turbine was built into the engine itself. For a moment, Sanford Moss's invention looked like a relic, but physics doesn't retire. Jet engines are powerful but wasteful. They gulp fuel. For applications where efficiency matters more than pure speed, the piston engine remained king, and piston engines at altitude still need to breathe. Look at any modern pressurized piston aircraft. Look at the Cessna 340 or the Piper Malibu. Inside their engine compartments, you'll find turbochargers that are direct descendants of Moss's Pike's peak experiment. The materials are better, the bearings are ceramic, the controls are computerized, but the principle is identical. Exhaust spins turbine, turbine spins compressor. Compressor force feeds the engine, and then the turbocharger conquered an entirely different world, the ground. In the 1970s, automakers faced an energy crisis. They needed more power from smaller engines. They remembered Moss's trick. They bolted turbocharged onto tiny four-cylinder engines and created monsters. The Porsche 930, the Buick Grand National, the modern Ford EcoBoost. Today, nearly every car manufacturer uses turbocharging to meet emissions standards. A modern 2-liter turbocharged engine produces the power of a 3-liter naturally aspirated engine while burning less fuel. This is Sanford Moss's legacy on every highway on Earth. Moss himself died in 1946, just as the jet age dawned. He never saw his invention conquer the automotive world. He never knew that his solution to a 1918 problem would become standard equipment on 2024 economy cars. He is rarely mentioned in history books. He didn't build the airframe. He didn't fly the missions. He built the breath. He was the man who realized that an engine without air is just expensive sculpture. Every time you see a car accelerate with that distinctive whistle, that's the turbocharger spooling. That's waste heat becoming power. That's Sanford Moss reaching through a century to squeeze more life from every explosion. The engine provides the violence. The fuel provides the fire. But the turbocharger provides the breath. And without breath, nothing flies, nothing drives, nothing lasts.